Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sleep Talks and Strategy, or Sleep Mechanics and Strategy Talk series. In this episode, I've got a very interesting topic that I kind of think about quite a bit, and that is about how the community, I feel like, puts way too much of an emphasis on the concept of power creep. Now, what is power creep? For those of you that don't know, power creep is this idea that as time goes on, new things will be implemented, old options will become irrelevant because the new options will just be better. So we'll want to run those Pokemon or those things instead of what we currently have. And I'm just making this video to suggest the idea that maybe we don't worry about power creep a little bit. Because in all honesty, I don't think power creep is as relevant as the community makes it out to be, especially when regards to the mono ingredient meta. Now, one of the biggest arguments that I hear against my take on ingredient specialists that we should be considering synergy on meals. That's oftentimes a talking point that I like to bring out is if you have a mixed ingredient specialist and it's got some synergy in the ingredients list, I say go for it. Oftentimes because that can be fun, and B, it can be very powerful to have an ingredient specialist that covers two ingredients in the same dish. But this is often met with the argument of, oh, but one day that meal's going to be irrelevant. Therefore, you should not invest into it now, because one day the Pokemon that you put so much investment into is going to be made irrelevant by the existence of another meal. And that's why I wanted to discuss this topic, because this is a point that's brought up quite a bit in favor of the mono ingredient meta. Now, as much as I am against the mono ingredient meta, I'm not actually against it. I put it in air quotes because I recognize its strengths. I do recognize its power. But I think that there are other options that can still be just as viable, and I think the community puts too much of an emphasis on it, which is why I'm against pressuring it as much as it is, which is why I make videos like this to counter those ideas. Now, and this is just it's not even just about mono ingredient meta. I'm talking about power creep as a whole in this video, and why it shouldn't be a worry. Make your investments, because we don't know what's in the future. So anyway, let's get into what I actually have to back that up. And I'm going to start by talking about meals, because it's kind of what inspired this video. Now, meals. As we know, new meals, relatively common to come around. As you can see, the previously most powerful meal in the game was Inferno Corn Keema Curry, which the argument was always, you could run an ABA Dragonite and an AAC or AAB Charizard or an AAC Tyranitar and make Corn Keema Curry all the time. Oh no, it's irrelevant. There's hidden power perk ups too. Oh no, power creep. This is way more powerful than this one. It is power creep. It's obvious power creep. But Defiant Coffee Dress Salad, huge power creep on Ninja Salad. Zing Zap Spice Cola, huge power creep on the Flower Gift Macarons. So why am I making the point of this video? Well, my point is, what does it matter? Like, legitimately. Sure, your option's no longer the actual best. But if you're able to reliably make Corn Keema Curry, this is still tremendously powerful. And if you already have the option to make it, then keep using it. I bet you someone who could reliably make this with two Pokemon, and then have two really solid favorite berry specialists and a good energy for everyone Pokemon, team of 5, I bet you that could easily get you to Master 20 on Greengrass. Maybe even on Cyan, and that's like with just running basic stuff. It doesn't matter that this is better. It doesn't make this worse. Typically in games when we talk about power creep, the reasoning why power creep is so bad, and I know this particularly relates to the baseline Pokemon games, and I think that's why a lot of people are concerned about power creep, because they look at the baseline games and see how power creep impacts it there, and then try to translate that over to Pokemon Sleep. They're different games. You can't make the comparison. In the baseline games of Pokemon, when a new Pokemon's introduced that power creep's an old option, when you're having battles, if you bring the old best option to the battle, it's going to be going head to head in direct combat with the option that is now power crept it. It's going against something that is objectively stronger. In this, there's no competition between these meals. It's all about what you personally decide to run. And if you have the team that is built for Inferno Corn Keema Curry, then make it. In fact, I would say, once the new option comes out, let's say there's something that begins beyond Hidden Power Perk Up Stew. If you create a team that creates consistent, reliable Hidden Power Perk Up Stew, then, and only then, you can then just use that team to make the Hidden Power Perk Up Stew to hunt for whatever exists beyond. And the same was true for the Corn Keema Curry, hunting for the Hidden Power Perk Up Stew. That team still got usage. And it's still, even if you don't want to hunt for the Hidden Power Perk Up Stew, you're going to still have that Corn Keema Curry to fall back on and do well with, because it's still getting you those big numbers. Nothing is retroactively made weaker by the existence of stronger options. And those strong, weaker options can be useful for hunting the things to get you the stronger options. So that's why I like thinking more about cross-compatibility and meal synergy when it comes to ingredients. Like, look at what can be mixed. I like the idea of the AAB or the ABB agron for this exact reasoning right here. I am not opposed to the idea of an AAC Shinx, even though it's kind of a weird choice. It's an option here because it's got, decent synergy. And that's all what this discussion is about. Now, one final thing. I think the devs recognize this and recognize the power in synergy. And I think future meals are purposefully, intentionally going to be synergistic, as they've proven with the past couple meals. Or let's just look at the ones that were added with the old gold power plant in particular. Zing Zap Spice Cola. It's got, okay, that's a bad example. Defiant Coffee Just Salad. It's got coffee and it's got sausage. It's got coffee and oil. Both of those options exist on the new mons they implemented with the old gold power plant, in both Agron, having coffee and sausage, and then Luxray having oil and coffee. Potential. There's potential there. I'm not saying it's the most optimal option, but there's potential. The devs recognize that synergy is powerful and put synergy on the new mons. Hidden Power Perk Up Stew. It's got soybeans and coffee, tomatoes and coffee, mushrooms and coffee. All three of those are ingredients that are found on the 3 new Pokemon that they introduced in the new update, as well as coffee. That is the new ingredient that came out with those 3 Pokemon. In fact, every single combination that you can think of the new Pokemon that they introduced has some degree of synergy with coffee. Even the AAC Vikavolt, which is probably the worst one, still has this one right here with coffee and honey. So the devs know that synergy is interesting and unique and can give a Pokemon a weird, unique niche that can be fun and very powerful when done correctly. So they're making meals like that. They might not necessarily in the future. I mean, like I said, the Zing Zap Spice Cola, there really is no synergy here aside from apples and ginger, which is common on like Raichu. But there is on these other meals, and it seems like they've almost intentionally designed it that way for the new Pokemon that have been introduced. So that's kind of where the meal discussion is. You may not have the best options, but you can always hunt the best options while you're using the worst options. It's not going to be made worse. Now, other power creep talk. This isn't really something to be concerned about in other terms as well, even in terms of productivity on the Pokemon. So we've already talked about it in terms of meals. Now let's talk about the terms of Pokemon. My first comparison here, we got a bunch of comparisons here for power creep. And I want to talk about the berry specialists that have all been quote-unquote power crept. Not too many in the game have been this yet, because there just haven't been that many berry specialists added of the same typing. The only examples here are the Houndoom and Weavile, the Walrein and Ninetales Alola, and then also basic Ninetales, but Ninetales didn't power creep Typhlosion at all. So this is really the only examples of Berry Specialist power creep that I could think of. And as you can see, I mean, Houndoom and Walrein definitely worse than Weavile and Ninetales Alola. But if you manage to catch a good Houndoom or Walrein beforehand, it's an option that you already have. You don't know what's coming around in the future. And it's better to invest into an option that you already have than hold out thinking that there might be something better, because it's something that you have. Now, and in almost every single circumstance, most circumstances that I show you here today are going to be outdone by just a simple little change. And that is, if you just put Help Speed M, one of the most basic modifiers that you can hunt for, and it suddenly, usually the power crept option will outperform the new option. And you can see that here with Houndoom compared to Weavile, and you can see that here with Walrein compared to Ninetales. So it seems like the devs have been kind of intentional to make sure that everything stays within the bounds, that sub-skills can still make a worse option comparatively better than even a decent option of a better species, just because modifiers and sub-skills make such a huge difference in this game. And realistically, it's going to be about what's in your box, not what's about the best option. Because the devs seem to be very intentional with that. Now, that may be different when it comes to the case of Legends, but yeah, we don't know what future Legends holds. Now, the next clear example of power creep was in Energy for Everyone Pokemon. And this is actually the only example. There might be another example, but it's the only one that I can think of here at 1 a.m. When I'm recording this. Fun time to know that. This is the only example I can think of a skill specialist being objectively power crept. And it was the transition from Sylveon to Gardevoir. Or you could put Wigglytuff here as well. They're roughly the same in terms of skill output. Gardevoir, objectively better. But if you know anything about the way that Energy for Everyone actually works as a main skill, you get diminishing returns on more procs. So it's not really all that much more beneficial to have that many more procs. So if you happen to have a good Sylveon or a good Gardevoir, they'll both keep the team topped off for energy. Which at that point, it doesn't matter which the species is, because they'll both do the job perfectly well. There's a maximum to how much value you can extract from the Energy for Everyone skill. But even if we were looking to get the most amount of procs possible, physically possible from these Pokemon, once again, if I just put in a Help Speed M modifier and a Help Speed M modifier alone, suddenly the Sylveon's outperforming the Gardevoir. It's power creep, yes, but is it power creep that we should all be concerned about? No. But now, the more interesting examples, and I think that comes down to ingredient specialists. First one I want to talk about, tomatoes. People were kind of like, whoa, Luxray is the new tomato best Pokemon in the game. You can see the difference between Luxray and Victory Bell. Basically negligible, less than 1 tomato a day. So I'm not even going to put in the Help Speed down here, because you can already imagine what that does. Because they're basically even. So hardly even a change at all. And that's one of the first and most obvious examples. Now let's talk about tomatoes. This was a huge one that was talked about because it transitioned from ABB options being the only options with potatoes to now we have a mono potato option with Meowscarada. And I see the idea that a lot of people think that we need to have a mono option for every single ingredient in the game. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea for a couple reasons. One, the devs have realized this whole balancing thing, and they've made it intentionally designed that even when you have a mono option, it's really not all that much better than the ABB options for the most part. There are exceptions, and we'll get to those. But for the most part, an ABB option, just as viable, works pretty well as well. And if you happen, and they're easier to catch as well. So, yeah, and then all that it does is make it more accessible to new players, which sounds like a great thing. But I think a big thing apart that makes the magic of this game great is that it's a grind. It's a long grind, and you see the payout for when you get to those things. And at least for me, when I first unlocked mushrooms, when I first unlocked potatoes, it felt like a huge step forward. The same with leeks. And I actually don't like seeing new mono options because I know that it means that new players coming to the game will never have that satisfaction of finally unlocking the mushrooms, finally getting the investment to the point where they're unlocking leeks, or finally getting to the point where they're unlocking potatoes. Now, potatoes were one that I actually thought could use a mono option because they didn't really deserve the rare ingredient treatment, but they got it, and now here it is. So, Meowscarada. Compared to Golem, now this one you can see the difference is actually quite a bit more substantial, but once again, even with that just help speed M alone, it brings it up to on par. And something else to mention about these ABB options, like I said, they're easier to catch, and also they produce another ingredient on the side just passively. That doesn't get talked about very often with the mono options, which in some of these circumstances can actually be really huge, especially if that's in a shared dish. In the case of Victory Bell and Mr. Mime, they provide more coverage in some really powerful meals like Dream Eater Butter Curry. Yes, I still think Dream Eater Butter Curry is relevant if you have the right Pokemon for it. So there's just more there than what people give it credit for. And a lot of people want this mono Meowscarada, but honestly, I would almost rather have any of these other Pokemon before I would have this. Maybe not the Golem, because there's not too much for soybeans and potatoes right now, but maybe one day there will be. That's another thing. As more options get released to the game, more multi-ingredient meals are real, and then more synergistic combos become a possibility. Sure, old ones get power crept, but new ones get made. So, yeah, there's just more interesting stuff there, in my opinion. But anyway, that's potatoes. Mushrooms. This one is one that really got talked about a lot, and I really don't understand why. I can see that I already forgot to... when I was doing my testing, I forgot to remove the help speed M. But you can see Gengar versus Quagsire, it's really not all that much different. Like, why was Quagsire talked about so much, guys? All this did was make it so that new players could get mushrooms right away on day, like, night 2 if they got lucky. Because 43 versus 47, really not that big of a difference. And like I said, Gengar with Help Speed M just produces more mushrooms than the Quagsire does. And also produces a boatload of berries on the side that the Quagsire doesn't produce. So, not that big of an impulse. I even threw Vikavolt in here because it was technically another power creep. Under the right circumstances, you can actually get more mushrooms out of a Vikavolt than a Quagsire. It's not pretty typical. It's mostly because the Quagsire has some inventory issues, but yeah, another example. And now we're going to start getting the more niche ones. This one was technically a power creep with oil, but not by much. You can see that 54 versus 55 is like hardly a difference, similar to the Victory Bell versus the Luxray later on. But I don't think this is an example of us. I think this is an example of one spot where we could easily see true power creep occur, because I think true power creep only really occurs when there aren't really any good producers previously existing. And I think that's really what we've got going on with oil here. Even if these guys have pretty great stats, it's going to be pretty difficult to get them to reach the thresholds that you want for oil in particular, the 66 per day that you'd want for Defiant Coffee Just Salad. These guys would need to be pretty cracked. So because of that, I think we just don't have a good oil farmer. And even though we have 3 mono options, 2 of them aren't really huntable because they're 16-pip Pokemon. And one of them, it's just... I mean, all 3 of them aren't good. They don't have good stats. They don't have good speed. They either need a buff or they need replacement. And they kind of did that with Luxray, but it's still an ABB option. And the ABB options should ideally, that's a very important word there, should be worse at base in favor of having those extra ingredients of another type. So The fact that the Luxray is the best one, I think, is evidence that we are due for another oil farmer eventually. But who knows when that will be. Now we're going to talk about the ones where it really, really was clear power creep. And this is an example where I think the problem was just we didn't have a good leak farmer at all. And they gave us a good leak farmer. This is one of the few situations where the previous best option in Doug Trio, if I give it Help Speed M, it's not going to pick up to the power crept option of the Quackable because it gets to 32 versus 34. Base Quackable is so much better than Doug Trio, which is the other best leak option, that it's going to be pretty difficult to get a Doug Trio that paces with the Quackable in any capacity. So I would say this is an example of true power creep, but I don't think it's really intentionally power creep, and just because I think it's more we just needed an option. It's a bigger power creep because Quackable has soybeans at base, so it can get better usage out of the leek and soybean combo, whereas Doug Trio it has tomatoes at base, which doesn't have as much synergy with leeks. So because of that, the Quackable actually is a little bit more going for it than what the Doug Trio does in that regard. But even a good Doug Trio can eventually do good things. It just needs a lot more stats than what a Quackable would need. And similar to leeks, we also had apples. Had a huge problem before. Nothing could keep up with the apples needed for those top tier meals, especially now that they've released Zing Zap Spice Cola. So when they gave us Skeledirge, of course it was better than stinking Delibird and Absol, who are both, by the way, notably 16-pip Pokemon, so nobody was really hunting these for apples. Any apple dish that was out there prior to Skeledirge's release, people primarily relied on their berry specialist for it, because that's how dire the apple situation was pre-Skeledirge. So, yeah, and once again, if I give the best apple option, even Help Speed M, it's not going to do it for it, unfortunately. Absol is the other best apple option, and Help Speed M doesn't quite pick it up to the Skeledirge's pacing. I wonder if I gave it... Absol has a lot of inventory issues. I wonder if I gave it inventory up L and a maxed out ribbon, if it would work. I haven't tested this. Let's see if correcting the inventory issues will correct the problem. Okay, then, and only then, if it has Help Speed M and it corrects its inventory problems, then Help Speed M does make it outproduce the Skeledirge. But that's a lot to be asking for on the Absol's behalf. Now we have one more example, and this is the one circumstance, and I think the one circumstance in the future where we will continue to see true power creep, not just giving us an option that wasn't previously there in a viable capacity, and that is pseudo-legendaries. Now, Gengar, coming back up again, kind of funny in that sense. As you can see, drastically outperformed by the Dragonite in terms of herb production. Even if I give it Help Speed M, it's not gonna help it that much to overcome the Dragonite in productivity. In fact, it's not even close. In fact, I kind of wonder. I didn't do this testing before, so I could be wrong here. Let's see. Ingredient Finding M is a huge boost, so maybe this will tip it over. But it does tip it over, but not by much. It takes Ingredient Finding M and Help Speed M to even be just ever so slightly beating the Dragonite in terms of herb productivity. And I think the reason for this is just because it's kind of a pseudo-legendary shtick. They cost more, but once you get them to that point, they were bad in their pre-evolved states. But once you get them to the point of being fully evolved and at their full capacity, then it's worth the wait, is kind of the idea, since they do take so much more XP than other Pokemon. So I think with the pseudo-legendaries, and legendaries are the only examples we're going to really get of true power creep on the species level when it comes to those sorts of things. So, and we had that example happen here with the Dragonite. We didn't really have that with Tyranitar because Tyranitar was released at the start of the game, and we already could see how insane Tyranitar was for Ginger compared to all other options. So, yeah. Anyway, if you have enjoyed the discussion, maybe learned something about the history of Pokemon Sleep, I guess it's kind of a history lesson, honestly. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And as always, I thank you guys for watching and hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.